continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph Meseches Yoma. This is Yoma Daf 31a. The Gemara here is in the middle of a question. Chotzetz oeno chotzetz. Are we concerned with chatzitza, with separation or not? Rashi over here explains the question. Chotzetz oeno chotzetz. L'Reb Yehuda de'amar mipnei srach tvila be'almahi. According to Reb Yehuda, who says the reason why we immerse before we enter the Azara, it's not a din d'oraisa, it's just in order that we should remind ourselves of the concept of tumah. So therefore, if we're tamei, we'll remember such a thing. So it's just a din d'Rabbanan. So pasla ba chatzitza keshar tvilo. So do we say that if you have a chatzitza, the tvila is not going to be good like normal immersions? Odilmor maybe kevan deina ba el lahaskiru ala tumi yeshana. Since the entire purpose of this tvila is just to remind the person in case he's tamei. Below l'tayr bahi, it's not really for tahara purposes. So ba lo pasla ba chatzitza. So in such a case, so therefore maybe chatzitza is not a concern. So that's the question of the Gemara. So Amar Lei, so he said to him, called the tikun rabbanon kain doraisa tikun. When the rabbanon make an institution, the halacha is that it's made in the same fashion as the doraisa, meaning just like the doraisa, there's a concern for chatzitza. So too in this case, there will be a concern for chatzitza. If you have a chatzitza, the immersion is not going to be kosher. Amar le Abaye le Rav Yosef. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, Bia b'miktzas shma bia olo. Let's say the person is partially entering into the Azara, not fully, so does he require tvila? Or do we say no, since he's not fully entering the Azara, he doesn't require tvila? Amar le, he said to him, Behonos yochichu, the thumbs, we're talking here about the thumbs of a mitzora, should prove that indeed you do need to do tvila. Shein bia b'miktzas, because there the mitzora would only put his thumbs into the Azara. V'tanyan, we learned in a brayso, mitzora tovel v'yomid b'shar niknor. It says explicitly that the mitzora would immerse and stand at the Nikanor gate. So you see that there is an issue of bia b'mixas. We are concerned with it, and you have to immerse. The Gemara continues, Ibailu, they ask the following question. Are you allowed to have a long knife and shecht? Rashi over here says, let's say a person doesn't want to immerse. So he'll stand outside the Azara. He'll stick his hand in and he'll shecht. Is that a good way to get out of having to immerse or not? That's the question. And now Rashi explains, now they're not asking whether the carbon is kosher. Because the halacha is, even though he stands outside of the Azar and shecht, it's kosher. The Tanya bezvochem ben habokar lifnei Hashem v'lo shochet lifnei Hashem. The shochet doesn't have to be in front of Hashem, so that's not the issue. But the issue is, again, according to Rashi, the issue is, do you have to immerse in such a situation? And the Gemara explains, Tiboy le benzoma, Tiboy le rabbanon. This is a question whether you go like benzoma. It's a question whether you go like the rabbanon. In other words, benzoma is very strict. He says it's a doraisa halacha to immerse before you enter the Azara. And the rabbanon, on the contrary, the rabbanon say there's no need to immerse if there's not an issue of tumah. You don't need to immerse before you enter the Azara. So it's a question on both. The rabbanon depligi oled Rabbi Yehuda. That's the rabbanon who argue in Rabbi Yehuda, as Rashi says over here. Tiboy le rabbanon depligi oled Rabbi Yehuda v'amru kol adam lo bo tvila. That's the shita that holds that not every person needs to do a tvila when they enter the Azara. So this is a question no matter which shita, and the Gemara explains. Tiboy le benzoma, it's a kash according to benzoma. Arkan lo mechay benzoma ela legavoy. Benzoma only require that you do the immersion when you're actually going into the Azara. Alo aval liveroy lo, but if you're outside the Azara, it's not an issue. Odilma asilam shuche, or you could say no, maybe it's a problem because you might accidentally go in, so you should immerse. And the Gemara continues to boil the Rabbanon. It's also a question according to Rabbanon. The pligi oled Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbanon who argue in Rabbi Yehuda. Arkan loka amri Rabbanon hasav de loka avid avod. The Rabbanon only said over there you don't have to immerse when you're not doing any kind of avod in the Beis Hamikdash. Aval hacha de kavid avod the law, but here where you're doing an avod, you have to be strict. You have to immerse. Odilma lo shnor, maybe there's no difference. And the Gemara says teku. We will leave it as a question. The Gemara continues at the two dots. Chamesh tevilos v'asara kiddush and tovel. The Mishnah said that the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur he did 5 immersions and he sanctified his hands and his feet 10 times on that day. And the Gemara says Tanu Rabbanu, we learned in a brayso Chamesh tevilos v'asara kiddushin tovel Kohen Gadol l'mekadesh bo bayom. Again he did 5 tevilos and he did 10 sanctifications on that day. The kulan bekodesh beveis haparva. All of them were done in the holy area of the temple in the Beis Haparva. Chutz mirishona shayisa b'chol, except for the first immersion of the day, which was done in an area that was chol. Al gabe shar hamayim, it was on top of the shar hamayim, the gate of the waters. Uvetzad lishkaso haisa, and it was right next to the Kohen Gadol's chamber. So Amar Abaya says, Shmami no, you see from this, Ein Eitam, the fountain or the spring of Eitam, Gavoa mikarka azora eser v'shalosh amos. It was higher than the ground of the Azara by 23 amos. And Rashi over here explains, Ein Eitam mimenu ba amas hamayim. It was from Ein Eitam that the water flowed. Lebeis Tvilas Shar Hamayim Shalachom. That's what supplied the water to this area where the Kohen Gadol immersed, which was above the Shar Hamayim. Well, the Fi'inyan HaMikros near release says, according to what it says in the Psukim, it seems to me, Shu Mayun Mei Niftoach. That's the same as what's called Mayun Mei Niftoach, Ha'omer B'Sefer Yoshua, in Sefer Yoshua, Shemisham HaGvul, Meshapeya V'Yored, L'Mizrach L'Mayra, V'hu HaGavoa, B'chol Eretz Yisrael. That's where, again, that's where the border was, and that's also the highest area in all of Eretz Yisrael. What's going on over here is the Gemara in Zvachim says that they wanted to build the Beis HaMikdash in this area by Ein Eitam. Amri nichti bei Pursa, but then they said, let's make it a little lower. Let's not make it on the highest possible altitude. Because it says that the Beis HaMikdash should rest between the shoulders, meaning not on top of the head, not at the highest point, but at the second highest point. The point is, you see that Ein Eitam is higher than everything else. Below Parish Minole, we don't know the source. Uparish le Abaye, and Abaye is explaining the source over here. And Rashi continues, Gavo mikarka azara esrim v'shalosh amos. So we know now, says Abaye, that Ein Eitam is 23 amos above the floor of the Azara. Kemidas gova sharamayim. Very simple. You measure the height of the sharamayim. Uvinyan kli shel shalosh amos mamala, and then put a kli that's 3 amos tall above it, because the mikveh has to be at least 3 amos deep. Lahachzik arboim sa, in order for the mikveh to contain arboim sa. Obviously, a spring of water is not going to flow upward, it's got to flow downward. So already we know that the mikveh itself must have been 23 amos at least above the ground of the Azara. So it must be that Ein Eitam is at least 23 amos above the floor of the Azara. And the Gemara continues, D'Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah in Midos. All the doorways in the Beis HaMikdash, Govan Esrim Amar, they had a height of 20 amos, as we said, 20 amos plus the 3 of the mikveh. V'rach van Esr amos, and they were 10 amos wide. Chutz mishal ulam, except for the entrance hall, the ulam that had a larger one. Rashi says that was double the size. Chutz mishal ulam shagavo arboim v'rach v'esrim, that was 40 amos high and 20 amos wide. But every other one, it was just 20 amos high. B'tanya, we learned in a brayso, v'rachatz b'saro v'mayim b'mei mikveh. It says he has to immerse in water. That means a mikveh. Kol b'saro mayim shakol gufa ola b'hen. Kol b'saro means that it has to be enough water to contain the whole body. The kamahin, how much is that? Amma alam, it's 1 amma by 1 amma. Berum gimel amos with a height of 3 amos, and there's your 3 amos. So you have the gate itself is 20 amos, another 3 amos to contain the mikvah, so you know that it's got to be at least 23 amos high. The shi'aro chachamim may mikvah arboim sa, and the chachamim say that the amount in a mikvah is going to be arboim sa. We'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Beis.